Okay, so when we come to the Bible, there are things about us, the way we've grown up, the person we are, that influence how we understand Scripture. So I want you to imagine putting on a pair of colored glasses. So I've got Emily's sunglasses here. Can you see them? Nice pink ones. But I want you to imagine, like, you know, in your hippie days when you wore like pink lenses or blue lenses or something like that. You know, when you put them on, everything suddenly looks pink or blue. And I want you to imagine that you are born with a pair of glasses that have a certain tint to them, a certain color. So you grow up thinking that is normal, that's just the way the world looks, that's just the way things are. And you don't know that your vision is actually influenced by the lens that you're looking through. Now, if you are a Christian who's born or who's grown up in a Western culture, that means that we are Christians with a certain kind of lens that we wear when we come to read the Bible. And when we read the Bible, our background, our culture gives us a specific storyline that we fit the Bible into. And it's an incredibly powerful storyline that influences the way that we understand things. And I'm going to just share a little bit about that now. So I'm just going to share this PowerPoint with you. I don't know how to, there you go. Okay, so if we come from a Western Christian background, we are influenced by what they call Greco-Roman culture. Does that ring a bell for you? I don't want to sound all clever or anything, but it's really just that our cultures come through the Greek and then the Roman influence. And they've drastically influenced the way that we understand and view the world. Now, the understanding came through from two particular philosophers. The one's name was Plato, okay, and his idea was that all of the most important thing about reality is the idea, is philosophy. Anything that's material is lesser. So the most important part about you is your soul or your spirit. That's the higher part of yourself, because that part of you is eternal and unchanging. Okay, are you still with me? Then he had a student named Aristotle, who, like all good students, didn't agree with his teacher. And he said, no, the most important thing about life is the material world, what you can actually see and touch and feel. Okay? So in Plato's understanding, everything about the world that's important is the unseen, your imagination, ideals. So flesh and bone aren't important. The idea of humanity is important. Whereas Aristotle would say, no, it's the other way around. Flesh and bone are important. What is a male and what is a female, that's important, not the idea of humanity. Okay. And so in Plato's understanding, the ideas are the best because they are unchanging and they don't decay. As soon as you come into the material world, then things break, your body gets older, and that's a lesser part of you. So in the Greek world, there was this big conflict of ideas about what was important in life. Okay. Then come along the Romans. And what the Romans did when they encountered Greece is instead of separating the two, Roman culture was like dualistic. So they would say, let's just incorporate both. So they said it's not either the ideals or the spiritual or material, it's both and. They're both important. And so they just merge them together. Okay? And then what they did is they created a theology around that. So heaven is the higher thinking, the spiritual part of yourself, and hell is the lower part, the physical side. So the spirit is good, and the physical is bad. Can you guys see that? Are your videos in the way? Okay, so spiritual is good and physical is bad. Now, the reason I'm sharing this with you is because whether you understand it or not, this idea of understanding of reality is always playing out, and it influences the way that we read the Bible, the way that we understand Scripture. Okay, so let's just go through. So, for instance, we're going to look today at Genesis. Now, you know the Genesis story. It's about God creating the world and everything in it. Okay, but it's also about the fall of man and how we fell into sin, and then how God needs to save us from our sin. So when we read Genesis, we impose this graph onto the Genesis story, and it influences the way we see the story of God, and we start to think that this is what Genesis is saying. And as I go through it, I'm hoping that it will seem familiar to you, and you'll think, yes, this is what I was taught when I was growing up. This is how I understand the Bible. Okay, so we begin in the Garden of Eden at creation, when everything is perfect. We are with God. Everything seems eternal and unchanging. Okay, but then because of the fall, Adam and Eve, they told that they can do anything they want, but they just mustn't eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Okay, and then they disobey God, and so they eat the fruit and they fall. And then because they have done that, they live in condemnation. So they chucked out of the garden, and the rest of life is toil and hardship and punishment for the thing that they did. The only way they can get out of this is if God will come and save them and bring them back. So God needs to create a way for them to be saved, and then you can go back to heaven. I hope that as I go through that sounds familiar, okay? But what I'm putting to you tonight is that this graph or this understanding, it's not really a depiction of Genesis. This isn't really what the Genesis story is about, and we're going to go through that now. It's just that we're so strongly influenced by our Greco-Roman culture and way of perceiving the world that this is how we understand it. So you, in the Garden of Eden, this perfect situation, because of your sin or original sin or separation from God, you fall, and then you are condemned, and you need to be saved by God to go to heaven. If you aren't saved, then you go to hell. Does that, I hope that as I share that seems familiar to you, and you might be saying, yes, I know that's how I was brought up, or how I've understood Scripture. So what I want to do now is I want to just go through Genesis a little bit and try and understand it without this kind of structure. Because can you see that if we follow this structure, it looks a bit like a production line. everything starts good over here. We have the Garden of Eden. Everything is good. There's no separation. But then as we continue along, we fall, and then there's like there's a sorting out. Some go to heaven and some go to hell. And we might be thinking to ourselves, well, wouldn't it be better just to stay in Eden? Why have this whole story play out? And then we might also be asking, what kind of God how do we understand a God that allows for some of these things to happen? But we'll get into that a little bit more just now. Okay, so as we read through the Genesis story, God creates everything, and then we get to the Garden of Eden. And a different way of understanding the Adam and Eve story is that they begin in a time of innocence, and as they kind of grow up and become more aware of the things around them and what they can and can't do, and then through disobedience and a bit of self-centeredness, they do exactly what God told them not to do. They eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So the creation story, instead of being this falling from heaven, going to hell, needing to be saved by God, it can be seen as a progression of human development. So at first, human beings, we were hunter-gatherers. We lived in the Garden of Eden. We ate and gathered whatever was available to us. And then when we chucked out of Eden, we become nomadic herders, and then farmers. This is the progression through Genesis. And then city dwellers, and then empire dwellers. And with each stage, there is a growth in human development, but also a loss in human innocence. Okay. I hope I haven't lost anyone. It's a bit lonely sharing here now. So no one being able to share back. Okay, so on the one hand, if we look at that, the Genesis story is a story of upward development of the human race. But in another way, at the same time, it's almost like an irony that Genesis shows. With every stage of development, Adam and Eve in Genesis chapter 1 and 2, they are hunter-gatherers. Then they have the tree event in Genesis 3. They taste of the tree of knowledge and good and the knowledge of good and evil. And they are chucked out of the garden, so they become nomadic herders. They now keep stock, and they're going to start farming. But the cost is the cost of shame and fear. They never had that before, but now as they develop, they now understand shame and fear. Now, I want you to think about your own human development as you grew up as a child. When your parents looked after you, hopefully you had good parents who looked after you. Mine were okay. And then your parents look after you, and you don't have to worry about anything. Everything's supplied to you. You've got to live under their rules. But then you get to a stage where you don't want to follow their rules. You want to do your own thing. And so you develop, but as you develop, you also encounter the fearful things of this world, and you become more self-aware, a bit like Adam and Eve did. And you see yourself for who you really are, and you're ashamed of the things that you've done. So then we move on to Genesis chapter 4 and 5, where we come across Cain and Abel. Cain disagrees with Abel, and we see here how humanity develops into, they're no longer nomadic herders, but now they are farmers. But what is the next consequence of the development? Well, murder is introduced into the human experience. It's this need to be in competition with others and to have what others don't have, or to have what others have instead of you, and so you take it. Then in Genesis chapter 6, God needs to kind of reset humanity, and instead of wiping everything out, he decides to save Noah and his family. But so the next stage of human development is that they become city dwellers, but then introduced into the human experience is corruption and violence. And then in Genesis chapter 11, we encounter the empire. And so people gather to build, and they are now skilled builders, and they want to build an empire. And it results in oppression and genocide. So at another level, Genesis isn't talking about our fall from heaven and God's plan, or God's way of bringing us back. It is also speaking about how we develop as humans, and how God reacts to that, or how God works with us in that. Okay. I'm just going to go back a little bit. All right. So there are a couple of problems if we approach the Bible with this kind of graph in mind. And the problem comes with that Greco-Roman understanding, because if we look at it this way, there is a line that we end up drawing here. And it means that we look at God as being in the Garden of Eden and in the place of heaven. And then we look underneath that line as our human experience, the things that we live through in this world. And God is not part of that experience. We kind of there to figure it out on our own, and we exist condemned by God. We're like in a place that we shouldn't be. And God is angry with us and doesn't like it. When in reality, what has actually happened, and what the Genesis story works towards, is to show us that at every step, it's like a repetitive sequence through every step. We're in the Garden of Eden. We start in the Garden of Eden. We disobey God, and if you remember, the command was that if you disobey me, you will surely die. And when God says you will surely die, he doesn't say you'll die sometime or you will figuratively die. What God said was, if you do this, on the same day you eat the fruit, you will die. But then as God encounters our disobedience, he meets it with mercy and gives another chance, if you like, tries to find another way. And through each step, it's just that repeated cycle of humanity's evil and capacity to develop is a positive thing, but with every development is an increased capacity for evil. So a good way to describe this would be like, right in the beginning of humanity, people didn't know how to split the atom. That's something that we've had to develop, and it's an incredible achievement of human understanding and scientific development. But with that has come the ability to create an atom bomb that can destroy not just human beings, but creation itself. And so with every development comes an increased capacity for evil. But God's plan is to meet our evil with good. And the story of Genesis is a story that ends with God's good prevailing. God's good winning at the end of the day. So God creates a good world which humans destroy with evil intent, but God does not destroy evil with more evil. No, God continues to make good, and God's good prevails. Okay, so, and then in the final chapter of Genesis, we are introduced to Abraham. And so Abraham, instead of God now just saying, okay, I'm done with humanity, I'm wiping them all out. Instead, what God does is says, I'm going to begin with a people, and I'm going to bless them so that they can be a blessing to others. So we are created to be in service to God, to reach out to others, to the foreigner, to the enemy, and to be a blessing to others. If we follow the Greco-Roman model, it's all about being better than the other, being in competition with others, overthrowing, outsmarting, dominating others. Dominating and converting others. When in actual fact, what our task is to be children of God, to realize His mercy for us, and then to reach out in love to others. And this is the overarching storyline of the Bible. The same pattern is repeated over and over again, not just in Genesis, but as you read all the way through Scripture, it's the same pattern of people getting it wrong, and God reacting with consequence. So you're still thrown out of the garden, but meeting us with mercy, finding a way for us to be saved. And this salvation culminates in the presence of Jesus. And again, it's God coming to us, not just being in the heavenly realm, but being in the physical realm with us. Jesus coming to be with us. And so to finish off, I want to just highlight this. It's important for us to think about which direction we read the Bible in. Okay, so if you look at this diagram, we have Jesus. Okay, and I think what that whole when you read the Bible through these lenses, through the influence of things, it means you're reading the Bible backwards. So we read Jesus through the eyes of Paul, and then through the eyes of Augustine, through the eyes of Paul, we then read Jesus. Or Aquinas, Luther, Calvin, Wesley, whoever, through all our different traditions, if we read the Bible backwards, we read through all these other philosophies and thoughts to see Jesus. And that can be really good. There's some good things about that. But the problem is that all of these people come through that Greco-Roman worldview, which we are discovering doesn't serve us well when we're reading Scripture. A better way, or a more helpful way to read the Bible is to read it forwards. Okay? So now if you look at this diagram, I don't know if your little videos are in the way there, but right at the end now we have Jesus. Okay? And now we're reading the Bible forwards. So we're starting with Adam, Abraham, Moses, David, the prophets, John the Baptist, and then Jesus. When we read it this way, we see the unfolding of God's story. We see the unfolding development of God and humanity, culminating in Jesus. And then we take this and move that forward into the other things. So then we can read Paul through the eyes of Jesus. and all the other philosophers that came after Jesus. We read through the trajectory of the rest of Scripture, the Old Testament through to Jesus, and then onward. And that makes a big difference in how we come to understand Scripture. And I'm hoping that this is just a little introduction. I'm hoping that as the weeks go by, we will begin to see the benefits of reading Scripture this way, forwards instead of backwards. Because when we read it backwards, we come with our lens and all the things that we influenced by, and we try to make the Bible say what we want it to say, or to answer the questions that we have, instead of reading it forwards, when we can allow Scripture to ask us questions, and to transform us as we work our way through it. Okay, so I'm gonna leave it there for now. I don't know if there are any questions that you would like to ask, or comments you would like to make, just on some of those things that I've shared so far.
Colin, can you hear me?
Yes, Bob.
I was very interested to hear about what you said about with every development, there's an element of evil.
Yes, yeah. Okay, does that just ring true for you, or were you wanting to add to that?
I suppose with development there comes a time of being dominant over other people.
Yeah.
And as you mentioned there, but the mercy is love. Mercy is love, and that to others.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Thanks, Bob.
Colin, what I found very interesting was about Plato. Plato had great influence on the truth and